Where did the month of April go? Well, it's the end of April and you know what that means. Seedling garden tour. Even though most of the seeding and seed starting stuff is pretty much done, we're sitting at about week 4, week 3 before the final frost. I still need to go through all my seeds, reorganize them because they're a terrible mess, and just make sure I didn't miss anything. If I did, this is sort of like the last chance to do them. And then this week will basically be seed starting all of the pumpkins and squash, things like that, into newsprint pots. Now, I'm of the belief that I like to hedge my bets. So what I do is I seed start half of them and then I direct sow half of them. And I don't know what it is, but it seems like every year one or the other seem to do better, but it's never the same every year from like year to year, you know? So it's a lot of work, but at least I know that I'm probably getting harvest. So let's start our little tour with the seedlings in the storage area. So these seedlings are under those cheaper Barina grow lights that you can get off of Amazon, and they seem to be working fairly well. I finally figured out the system that I like so that I can raise and lower them. And I've actually just taken wires, like you can get little packs of wires from the dollar store, or, you know, the florist wire that comes in that round. And that's what I use instead. And then it's just really easy to raise and lower those lights as necessary. So far, everything is looking pretty healthy. I get a lot of questions about my Glad method where I just start them in water. So I'm going to show you today just how that looks like for me. I'm going to pull this one up. This is totally normal. This is exactly what we want to see. And we are just going to keep these Glads in water just like this until we're ready to harden them off and plant them outside. And even when we're hardening them off, it's still going to stay in this type of water tray. Now, it's also really normal to have a big variance of how tall everything is. Like you can see, these are my overachievers. Over here, these are ones that are new to me. I didn't say them over the winter, so they're starting to come up, but they're just a little bit slower. That's all completely fine and normal. As you're watching this tour, remember that I've been starting some of my stuff early just because I need it earlier for some events that I have. For example, these Cosmos, these are quite ahead and early of my regular stuff. But so far looking good, and if the weather is decent, I'm going to start hardening them off pretty soon. So this is what my regular size Cosmos look like, and these ones are planted at approximately the correct time. This whole tray is completely new to me. Haven't grown any of these flowers before. Here we have a bunch of the asters and the Rudbeckia. I had a little bit of problem with germination with some of the varieties, but I think I have enough that I should be good for my needs. These are my main season Snapdragons and Feverfew. I have some early stuff that I planted out, and that's looking a bit rough, but this stuff that's planted at the correct time seems to be doing really, really well. This is from my second round of Lisianthus, and while it's a little bit behind my first round, you know, I'm not noticing a giant difference between the two, which makes me wonder if starting super, super early is so necessary. Those tall flowers in the back there are my early succession of zinnias. It's always a little tricky with zinnias because, you know, they don't respond well to any sort of frost, but if you can get them to work, this variety blooms a little bit earlier, so then you have better views. This is the Queen Lime series. Celosia is always a tricky one because they seed start so well, but they're such a pain in the rear to harden off. Starting to see some green on these later dahlias that I purchased. I should probably pot these up soon. So Dahlia Land is doing pretty well, although wow, these really look like they need to go out, and it's just not safe yet. Starting dahlias early in zone 3 is really tricky because, you know, we just don't have a lot of time. So we want to like push the season. I started all of these cuts early because I want tubers from them. And with my experiments last year taking cuts in April, I didn't get tubers that were big enough to store over the winter. So I bumped up doing my dahlia cuttings by an entire month, and I'm crossing my fingers that it works. But the flip side and the bad side of that is that now these dahlias are so ready to be hardened off and pushed outside, and I just can't chance it. So even though I don't necessarily need any more cuttings per se, or the ones I take aren't going to get tubers, I'm still taking cuttings just because I don't want them getting so tall like some of these are getting. So tomatoes are living their best life. I finally think I've got the timing right on these so that they're not too tall by the time they need to go out. We will be having lots of straw flowers this year, which is exactly what I want. Over here we have what I like to call my main season zinnias. So these are definitely a lot smaller than the ones that you saw upstairs, but that's okay. These are at the correct time. And then I'm starting some sunflower seeds. I found last year that anything I direct sow did not work. I think I have some critters that really like them. My broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower all seems to be doing really well. This tray is probably gonna go upstairs to be hardened off. So grasses are brand new to me, and these seem to be doing well, although, you know, got a few weeds in the mix, of course. One huge disappointment are my scabiosa. I don't know what the deal is, but my germ is extremely poor, so I'm definitely gonna have to start some more. Basil, on the other hand, are definitely living their best lives. So that's the current state of seed starting indoors right now. Let's take a look outside and talk a little bit about hardening off and how things are going. So we're starting to prep the beds. Definitely not everything can be planted out, but some of my earlier cool season stuff is getting planted out. I've been actually hardening it off for almost a month, weather permitting. So some of this stuff is like so ready to get out into the soil. So we use a hand rototiller type thing. It's made in the 90s and I don't think it exists anymore. It's called the Garden Claw. And then we add our amendments, and hopefully by using the Garden Claw, we're not disturbing the soil structure too much, but we're able to provide a nice base for the new plants. This is what my early snaps are looking like, and I feel like they did better last year. These are not great. I feel they're not that much bigger than my main season snaps, but we'll see. So to prep our beds, we use a number of things. The first is alfalfa pellets, and these are pretty cheap to get and they're really helpful for the soil. So let's go put those on. Don't do anything precious. You literally just scoop and put them in. And now these will work better not on top of the soil, but worked into the soil. But that will happen naturally when we're digging and putting in the plants. So the next step is we're gonna put on some worm casings. You could also use other compost. You can use sheep manure, horse manure, whatever you have available. I don't think one is particularly better than the other, at least that I've noticed. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna go like that. Now the worm composting stuff, it a little goes a long way, so I think this is fine. Another amendment I like to use is earth medicine, but I just ran out, so I have to go order some more. So I'd also like to mention that just because I'm putting something on my soil doesn't mean that like, oh no, if you're not doing the same thing, it's like all wrong and everything's terrible. No, my soil is sandy loam. If you have clay, you might use a slightly different approach. So just know that like every person's soil requires something different. So let me be the first to say that hardening off is hard. Like, yes, it can be done in 1 week, but it's definitely better if you do it over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. So anything that is any bit cold tolerant, I'm already starting to push out the door and starting to harden it off. Stuff that needs a little bit warmer weather, I will hold off on yet. Just see what our temperatures are doing. In this video, you may have also noticed that, like, you know, we have Rachel walking around in the background, and some of the shots, they're not my hands. I have some helpers out here today, and something I wanted to talk to you about is just this idea that, you know, as homesteaders or people who like self-reliance or gardeners or whatever, that we have to do every single thing ourselves. And while that is noble and admirable, and some people are able to do every single thing themselves, I'm going to be really open and say I cannot. I absolutely 100% cannot do all of this all by myself. I hire part-time and casual help. My husband helps me. He's currently building a greenhouse that we got from a former neighbor, and he'll be building another high tunnel for us. And just, if you think it's all me doing every single thing here, no, it really isn't. I mean, am I directing it all? Am I doing a good chunk of it? 100%. It's unrealistic to think one person can do everything. So I hope that encourages you, especially if your gardening situation is a bit larger and you're getting really overwhelmed. Like, think about ways that you could maybe get some help in your life. Like, you don't have to hire permanent part-time employees or anything like that. You can just hire a university student for a couple hours a week, like 4 hours. You know, what kind of a difference would someone else working on your farm or business for just 4 hours a week make for you? Or you could trade weeding for bouquets, or, you know, stuff like that. I think it's just really important for those of us who are being influencers of some sort to be open about that we can't do it all. So anyway, thanks for coming to my TED Talk, and let's get back to the garden tour. Finally, we have some tulips sprouting out. Been waiting forever for these, hoping and praying that they would come up. So hopefully we'll have a few by the end of May. Also very excited, my rock foil is coming up. Just every time a new perennial or a new something comes up, it just feels like such a triumph. So over here by the raised beds, you can see we have something very different. This is going to be a greenhouse. It doesn't look really great yet because Michael's not done putting it together, like, obviously, but this is actually a greenhouse from our neighbors when we still lived in the city, and they're really not gardeners. So when they first moved in, I of course was like, hey, if you ever don't want that greenhouse, I will happily buy it off of you. When they knew we were moving away, they said, you know what, we really never use this, we're not going to use it, so you guys can just have it. So I'm so grateful. Thank you, Matt and Jen. Know that this greenhouse is going to be very loved and put to really good use. Every time a little bit of green appears, I pretty much do a happy dance. So I hope you enjoyed the Zone 3 end of April garden tour. If you're also a cold climate gardener with a short growing season, make sure you subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.